Anyways, I recently finished what's called a Riordanverse Arena. If you don't know what that is, it's basically a tournament style bracket that you guys vote on. The most recent one was the book arena, so in this video, I'll be going over the top 10 books in the Riordanverse, based off of your votes. So, in the 10th spot, we have The Blood of Olympus, the last book in the Heroes of Olympus series. It was a pretty fun book with a lot of action, just connecting all the events from the other books in the series. My favorite part personally was definitely the Nico and Reyna storyline, since it completed Nico's development all the way back from the Battle of the Labyrinth, and it gave us some pretty sick Nico moments like the Bryce Lawrence scene and the Lycaean scene. It looks like this book wasn't higher on the list because a lot of you were underwhelmed with the final fight against Gaia, which is totally understandable. I was too. The Burning Maze is one of the two Trials of Apollo books that made the top 10, and it's my favorite of the series. The story itself was pretty in line with what we expect from a Percy Jackson book, but what makes this one so good was the two characters who underwent some really important development, one being Apollo and the other being Jason. This book showed Apollo what it meant to be a hero, as he was always, well, a god. You know the gods, they're selfish, they make heroes do their work despite the dangers that go into that. They don't care about what happens to anyone other than themselves, but Jason's sacrifice showed Apollo what it meant to be a true hero, and what it was like being a human, having to suffer the consequences of the evil and unfairness of the world. And Jason's development, I mean, from the beginning of the book, we already see just how much work he's put into fulfilling his promise to add shrines for all the minor gods in Camp Jupiter. We see that, despite finding some sort of peace in his life, he's willing to jump back into the dangerous life of a demigod to help Apollo, and in the end, sacrifice his life to save those he cared about. The Serpents Shadow is the finale of the Kane Chronicles series. Although the Kane Chronicles seem to be the least popular series in the Riordanverse, I saw this book getting a lot of praise for the final fight. The fight between Carter and Sadie, I guess some of the Egyptian gods, and Apophis was very... well, let's just say it wasn't as underwhelming as the final fight against Gaia. There were a lot of tense moments. Apophis was intimidating and scary. He was what you'd expect from the snake that's meant to swallow the sun, and I think that's why so many people enjoyed this book and appreciated the ending. 7th place may seem really low for the Lightning Thief, but that's my fault for designing the bracket so that the Lightning Thief goes up against the Titan's Curse so early in the competition. This book is pretty unanimously loved throughout the fandom, and it kinda has to be, as it's the book that started it all. The Riordanverse wouldn't exist unless this book was really good and captured the attention of all the new readers. The Lightning Thief presented a relatable protagonist, interesting themes and locations, and some epic plot twists and fights. So for those of you who haven't read Magnus Chase, you've got to get on that because the series is awesome. In my opinion, it's the funniest series in the Riordanverse, and it's got a great cast of characters, a really cool enemy, and a very interesting storyline. Hotel Valhalla, the Camp Half-Blood of the Magnus Chase series, is a really grand, sort of ethereal place. It's such a good setting, it makes you just want the whole book to take place there. The Sword of Summer is the first book in the Magnus Chase series. It's funny, it's interesting, the characters are likable, and the enemy at the end is pretty cool. I can't really praise the series enough, but I will say it's one of the best of the Riordanverse, definitely in the top 3. It's hard for the third book in a series to be better than the first, but the Titan's Curse does just that. From the introduction of the hunters and Nico to the death of Zoe to Percy holding up the sky, this book is filled from start to finish with iconic moments in the franchise. It really kicks off the plot of the Percy Jackson series, and the final fight on, I think it was Mount Othrys, was one of the best. We get to see the first fight between a god and a titan, got to see Thalia and Luke face off, we even got to see Frederick Chase fight against some monsters. Bianca's sacrifice began the incredible transformation of Nico, setting him up to be one of the deepest and most developed characters in Percy Jackson. The Son of Neptune is the second Heroes of Olympus book. Unlike the first, which was Camp Half-Blood and Leo, Piper, and Jason, this one is Camp Jupiter, Percy, Hazel, and Frank. I think people like this book so much because of the contrast between new and familiar. While introducing Camp Jupiter and new characters like Reyna, Hazel, Frank, and Octavian, we get to see Percy again for the first time since the Last Olympian. Frank and Hazel just so happen to be very likable characters, and the story itself is also really nice, slowly uncovering Hazel and Frank's backstory and finishing off with a really cool fight in Camp Jupiter. The Tower of Nero is the finale of the Trials of Apollo series. The Tower of Nero was a good book, although to be honest, I don't really remember much of it. I do remember there being a lot of Nico and Will in this book, which I have to assume plays a part in its current ranking. The final fight between Apollo and Python was also really cool, and I did like the ending when Apollo reclaims his godhood, but also remembers his promise to Jason and everyone who helped him along his journey. The Last Olympian is one of the most memorable books in all the series. The entire book was just straight up action. Percy running around from place to place, fighting monsters and titans alike. He ends up fighting the Minotaur again, Hyperion, and eventually Kronos. We also get to see every character who's been introduced throughout the series team up for the amazing Battle of Manhattan. Nico and Hades roll up with their army, Camp Half-Blood charges in, even Paul Blowfist takes up the sword. Probably even cooler is that the gods also team up to defeat Typhon. Basically, there's just a ton of action between all the coolest, most powerful, and most loved characters. In the end, we get to see Luke's redemption, as well as Percy and Annabeth's underwater kiss, which is a top moment for Percabeth fanatics. All in all, a fitting finale for such an awesome series. The House of Hades is one of the best books because every character from the Seven got their time to shine. Leo had his 4 chapters with Calypso on Ogygia, one of my favorite moments in all of Percy Jackson. So much so that it was the first video I ever made on this channel. Nico and Jason and their friendship also got a really cool moment with the fight against Cupid. But obviously the thing we all remember from this book is Percy and Annabeth's journey through Tartarus. Inspiring countless fan arts, their journey took up half of the book and was worth every second. Both of them got so much development, especially Percy having to deal with his regret and guilt with how he abandoned Bob. Speaking of Bob, he and Mason were also introduced and instantly loved. Percy also shows his evil nature at one point, choking the goddess Aklis. All of these moments combined make the House of Hades the most memorable of the Heroes of Olympus books, and ultimately the best book in Percy Jackson.